This week on the BackTable podcast.
And the very first line that I'll write when I type out what the expectations are is, we are still friends. Like, I am here as your chief resident, and part of my job is to help you grow and help you get better. And sometimes that might mean giving you direct and honest feedback. I want you to know that means nothing to our friendship, and I want to maintain that at all costs. But I'm here serving this role. And then these are my, 40 really specific expectations. And in doing that, I think it helps a lot, because when time comes that you do need to do some guidance or, quote unquote, be their boss, you can sort of refer back to that initial conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to BackTable Podcast, your source of all things urology. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at backtable.com.
Hi, everyone. We're really excited in this episode to be formatting a little bit of a new segment. I'm Lindsay Hampson. I'm the Urology Program Director at UCSF, and I'm co-hosting this episode with Gina. Gina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gina Badalato. I am the Associate Program Director, Vice Chair of Education at Columbia.
Our new segment is really interested in looking at trainee-focused podcasts and topics that are interesting to students and trainees in urology. Gina and I recently had the chance to join Aditya and talk about some education-related topics on BackTable. And we realized in doing it that it would be so useful to have a trainee-focused podcast that really spoke to trainees and talked about issues that they were interested in. So as a result, we are launching our first one today, and we have a special guest with us. His name is Max Bowman. He's a 6-year urology chief resident at UCSF, and I'm going to let him say hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored and excited to be here with you guys. And I can't wait to answer whatever questions we have.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you, Max. And, for everyone to know, Max is an outstanding chief resident. He's really focused a lot on developing his leadership skills. And so we thought of him when we were interested in talking about the topic of developing as a leader during residency. Max is finishing out his 6th year now and is then going to come on faculty as a general urologist at UCSF. And so we thought he'd be a great person to help focus our discussion around leadership. So, Max, to get us started, I want to take you back to when you were a junior resident and, you hadn't taken on necessarily a big leadership role in residency yet, but give us a sense of, what experiences did you have as a junior resident that kind of helped you to think about leadership? Anything good or bad happened that kind of set examples for you, and what kind of guided you to during that kind of early phase of your career?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea. And I was really excited to kind of come talk about this a little bit with you guys when you guys invited me, because I think medicine is a really unique field in that a lot of us just become leaders just by simply entering the field. And even when I was a junior resident, I sort of anticipated that a bit coming up, and I started to sort of pay attention to that. And I think what happens is we progress through our PGY rank, and eventually suddenly you're the chief resident. And I think if people aren't intentional and thoughtful about that transition, they kind of are caught on their heels a little bit and not entirely ready for that responsibility, even though it is just part of our training and beyond. So I think early on when I was a junior resident, especially, I at least in the back of my head, sometimes if I had more executive function in the front of my head, would pay attention to qualities that I liked in leaders that I had. And I had many, many, many good examples of that. And then also things that didn't really go so well that I observed, and kind of took mental stock of that over the years. And I think that was a really important kind of reflection that I did throughout my junior years, and helped me a lot later on as I was, trying to prepare for this leadership later on.
Yeah, taking a step back there, Max, for those of us that don't know you as well as Dr. Hampson does, was there anything in your life or medical school training or any prior careers that you had to prepare you for leadership or to think about that role in residency?
Yeah, absolutely. I was on student government when I was in medical school, kind of all 4 years. And I was a manager when I was like working in college, and I've sort of gravitated towards this interest of mine sort of historically. I don't know if it's just, it must just be kind of a predilection of my own, I think, just sort of naturally just enjoying roles like this. And I guess having some success here and there just sort of pushed me towards wanting to develop it more and more. And I think even before residency, probably even before medical school, I had a lot of formative experiences just kind of pointing me in that direction and kind of priming me at least for these types of situations.
I want to go back to something you mentioned early on, Max, because I think it really resonates with me. And, you mentioned that a lot of people in medicine become leaders kind of de facto. And that's so true that, we're asked to take on business responsibilities, leadership responsibilities without having necessarily been given any training. And in some ways, I think that's part of the calling of medicine. We tend to be leaders. We tend to like those leadership roles. And so we do gravitate towards it. But it's not necessarily something that we think about really intentionally. And, Gina, I'm interested in your experience too. When you see people that are now need to assume a leadership role, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't have a perfect answer. I'm interested to hear from all of you. But it's interesting. I think that our strength is our knowledge of clinical practice and knowledge of patients and how things work and how to be kind of immersed in that hospital system. And, there may be hospital administrators or other people that have had formal leadership training, and that will give you some of the skills, but it will never replace that essential knowledge that we have that comes from working and living in this environment, that lived experience. And so I do think that that's something that is very special in terms of like preparing for leadership. I think, again, just as Max was saying, like looking at your role models, looking at people functioning in difficult situations and having mentors and role models who inspire you and kind of draw from those experiences. What do you both think?
Yeah, I think, like I said, oftentimes we're kind of pushed into these roles, and the residents or trainees that I think I've seen do it well are those who do kind of intentionally think about leadership. So, Max, I think you're a good example of this. I know from having talked to you before you started your chief resident year that you actually had a process, an intentional process where you thought about leadership. So tell us a little bit about what that process was like. How did it evolve, and what kind of plan did you think about and put in place, before you took on these kind of leadership roles?
Yeah, I know that you know this so well because I had, I think, several anxiety-ridden conversations with you in the last couple of years about this topic. And, I think in the world of business, for example, people are promoted to leadership because they are good leaders and they want those positions. And in medicine, sometimes we're promoted to leadership because we're good clinicians or good researchers. And those skill sets do not overlap with being a good leader sometimes. And that leads to sometimes some of these issues of people that are a little bit unintentional about their position and their leadership. So I've felt from the very beginning that I don't want to be in that position. I know that, these positions are forthcoming and I want to be prepared for them. So that process for me, I think, definitely started when I was probably a third or fourth year resident. And it was around this exact idea of how do I prepare for the inevitability that this is going to be something that I am, kind of granted with or endowed with, and something that I definitely was developing an interest in my career and in my future of being a leader in medicine, and one that's, good at it and interested in it. I think I'm very fortunate to be at the program where I am, and I have to give you a lot of credit, Dr. Hampson, because we do have a really great leadership curriculum that we've been developing over the last few years under you and Dr. Breyer. And I've tried to learn as much as I can from that type of thing. And I think another thing that I've done as much as possible is lean into the available opportunities that are out there, whether that is little micro examples of leadership or actual roles that I'm able to, apply for or be a part of. and just soaking up and leaning in as much as I can to those types of opportunities and getting, the reps in, as some might say, to really build those skills and kind of be open to failure if it comes and success if it comes, and kind of adapting along the way.
Max, do you want to elaborate a little bit more about the leadership training you have during residency? I think that's important.
Sure, yeah. And again, just all the credit goes to Dr. Hampson, Dr. Breyer, and the education team here. It's been great. And we actually just published a little perspective piece in Urology Practice recently about this. But I think it was recognized by our visionary leadership here that it is something that is lacking in medical training sometimes, that we focus a lot on, clinical education. We focus a lot on, maybe research or some things that are directly relevant to our in-service or our boards or whatever it is. And this really important part is neglected sometimes in the formal curriculum of our residency training. And several years ago, they, have started to implement some more of these sessions that are focused on how to be an effective leader, how to do public speaking, how to, there's all kinds of examples that are just kind of outside of our clinical training, and it's something that's been instituted during our didactic time, and I've been really lucky because it does align with a lot of my interest to take advantage of that.
It's interesting because having been the person who put that curriculum together and sees all the evaluations afterwards, I get the spectrum on these. So some of the residents evaluate these sessions and they love them and they think they're great and they want more of it and they want it again. And then there's other people who are like, why aren't we learning about BPH? Like, I can learn this on my own time. So I don't know, Gina, if you have that same push and pull. I think in general, more people are wanting this. And, I think you guys too had like the hidden curriculum, right? So there are different versions of this. Where can we point people to if their own institution doesn't have these resources?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Lindsay. Striking a balance, making sure you get to the core, but also I think we're all emphasizing you have to be intentional about this and really think about this critically and not just think it's an instinct that you're going to pick up. So I think it's great that you have it within your own program. I encourage everyone to read that piece that you wrote that really dissects really how you integrate it into your curriculum and the lectures that you had as part of it. And as you're alluding to, both of our series, the Empire and New York Section series, and I know the COVID lecture series do have lectures geared toward these things like, finding your career path, thinking about jobs, negotiating, things like that, where you can hear from some experts, at least what their perspective is and how they approach these things. Max, you mentioned that during residency, you sought out opportunities for leadership. Can you be more specific about what those were, both maybe at your institution and outside?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I sort of alluded to examples of like micro opportunities and macro opportunities. I almost like the micro opportunities like more because I think the macro ones are obvious. It's kind of, when email goes out asking for a resident to volunteer for some committee or something, I like to be the person that tries to do that and kind of fulfill that role. I think particularly during my dedicated research year, I took up as many of those roles as I could. And that was a really valuable, I think, gratifying, rewarding experience. But the micro opportunities, I think, come unexpectedly and don't really get any visibility. It's not something that goes on your resume. It's not something that you necessarily get any recognition for, but I think it does help in a lot of ways. And that comes in a lot of different, small settings, whether it's being the person that sends out the Zoom link to the morning didactics to all the residents and, helps, just remind everybody of journal club that's coming up, or, is the person that responds right away to the reply all email asking people to complete their evaluations, or, on rounds, if it's a team rounding and it's not clear what the hierarchy should be of who should be leading rounds, you just kind of step up and you take that opportunity as long as you're not taking it from somebody else. And you talk to the patient in the room when it easily could have been your chief to do that, but you take the initiative to step up and do that. And it's just little opportunities like that throughout the day that I think is good to intentionally sort of take advantage of and just get that experience and do that as much as you can.
Well, I think too, the more you take those small opportunities and the more other people see you in that role, then the more they give you that role too, right?
Absolutely.
Because then they think of you for those opportunities and they think of you as the one who volunteers or the one who has experience. So you're right that like walking the walk actually helps you walk farther in a way, because you're kind
Absolutely.
of setting yourself up in other people's minds as the person who does that.
I've said that before to people, and I'm interested in both of your opinions. Like, how do you avoid being the person that is kind of then given all of these smaller responsibilities kind of being dumped on? How do you walk that line of pitching in versus then getting all of these tasks as a cascade?
That's a good
Max,
question.
I need you to teach me how to do this.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dr. Hampson, I know that you're it's preaching to the choir a little bit for you. I don't know you as well, Dr. Badalato, but I get the sense it's the same for you. I don't know. I may end up having the same problem. I'm yet to kind of feel overwhelmed by it, but I've had in some instances some success in saying no to some things that I felt like I didn't really want to do. And it is a hard balance to strike. I'm not perfect at it whatsoever. I think I do have a chronic overcommitting problem as well. But it's, I think that it probably takes some self-discipline to say no. It's something I need to work on.
I think there's also opportunities there. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean you can't give the opportunity to someone who can. And that's a way of being a leader also, right? So if I get asked to write an editorial or something, that's an opportunity to give somebody else a chance to shine and to have a voice. And, those committees that you get asked to do, rather than just saying no, saying, I would love to, I can't, but here's someone who I think would be really great. And in that way, you turn into a sponsor for other people, which is like almost the highest form of leadership, right? Where you're not just doing it yourself, but you're actually promoting other people to be in those positions. And I think then, doing that actually establishes you even more in your kind of leadership role, even though you may not be doing the work of the activity, or you're, sponsoring other people to do it.
Yeah. And I think that I've noticed that in you a lot, Dr. Hampson. I really try to model my own leadership after that. Actually, another of our assistant program director, Dr. Michelle Van Kijken here, yesterday, she and I were talking about something totally unrelated to all this, but she said some words that I thought were great, which is that a lot of people want to impress the people that are above them in the hierarchy, where like a good leader should impress the people that are below them in the hierarchy. And I absolutely love that, because I think that's completely relevant to what we're talking about here. And I think your effectiveness as a leader means nothing if the people you're leading don't appreciate you as a leader. And how you get appreciated as a leader is exactly this. You're advocating for them, you're fostering their growth, you're supporting them, and you're making them know that they are supported. And that is a huge thing that I put a lot of intention and effort into when I started my chief year, is thinking really critically about how I make my junior residents feel supported, and that I create a fertile environment for them to grow. And that to me is synonymous with excellent leadership. And I think it's a vital ingredient to it.
So asking another question around that, often in residency, develop these friendships with your co-residents and your camaraderie, and you're in it together. And as you're talking about as a chief resident, you want to support them and promote them. But you also sometimes have to be their boss and tell them when they're doing things wrong. And so how do you navigate that transition between being like their friend and compatriot to now being their superior?
Yeah. You know very well how worried I was about this. I think I'm probably more friendly and familiar with the Residence in our program than the average person. And it was really challenging for me. And like I will say for a lot of other stuff here, I don't think I'm perfect at it. I think I'm still learning and growing, but there are a lot of ways that I thought about this beforehand, because it was a big concern of mine. I think my thinking has evolved and changed over time when it comes to this topic, where I've sort of come to see it now as not separate from my friendship with them, but an extension of it in some ways, where the hierarchy is going to exist no matter what, whether we're friends or not friends. And we're all existing in this system together where they understand that, I think. And something that I've done before starting with each new team and each new resident that I've worked with is to set extremely explicit expectations before we even get started. And the very first line that I'll write when I type out what the expectations are is, we are still friends. Like, I am here as your chief resident, and part of my job is to help you grow and help you get better. And sometimes that might mean giving you direct and honest feedback. I want you to know that means nothing to our friendship, and I want to maintain that at all costs. but I'm here serving this role. And then these are my, 40 really specific expectations. And in doing that, I think it helps a lot because when time comes that you do need to do some guidance or, quote unquote, be their boss, you can sort of refer back to that initial conversation and be like, hey, look, like this was my expectation. I think this is the way that you're falling a little bit short. I'm friends with you. I want to give you my respect, but I also hope that you feel out of your friendship with me that you want to give me your respect as your chief resident. When you do this, it makes me feel this way. When you do this, it makes me feel as if you're falling short of these expectations that were already laid out. And that's been really successful for me so far, I think. I do feel like I've maintained a lot of my friendships, and a lot of them I feel have actually grown a lot deeper and more, I think just richer during this experience. Hopefully because of some of those efforts, but it's a hard line to walk. And fortunately, I don't have to I don't need to come down hard on people very often, but on a few occasions, I think it's been helpful.
So I'm very interested in this list of 40 expectations that you set out. This is very intentional. And how do you come up with this list? Where do you get it from? How do you think about what's important when you're setting those intentions with people?
I put a lot of thought into it. There may be 39, there may be 41. I'm not sure how many, but I think a lot of it just takes a lot of just thought in how you want things to run. They might be super basic. It's like, I want you to check in with me before you go home at the end of the day. It might be, I expect a note in the chart every time you see a patient or talk to another team. It might be, I expect everybody to be on time to rounds. It's like those sorts of things. And it really requires a lot of almost just like diagnostic thinking of how I want my team to run and what I think will lead to success as a team and success in taking care of our patients. And again, it's like a rule book that we all agree on before everything happens. I made sure everybody read them before we started. I would actually hide little Easter eggs in the block of text and say if you read this far, text me the word pinecone and I'll Venmo you $5. And I did that a few times throughout the text. And somebody texted me the last word, but not any of the ones in the middle. I was like, okay, you clearly skipped to the end. Please go back and read the whole document, because I really wanted people to read it. And I know the residents are stressed out and busy and they're not going to necessarily do it, but it was of vital importance to me and I think synonymous to the success of our team and our patient care together. And yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it was just thinking really deeply about what I think is important for us to succeed.
Have those changed over the course of the year? Have you gotten rid of any or added any? What have been the things that you've added or have changed?
Yeah, I think inevitably things kind of come up as you go along that you're like, oh, I didn't anticipate this being a problem. and you have to kind of address it ad hoc, which is a little bit hard. I mean, this is why I was really trying to be as complete as possible, because it is harder if somebody does something that you didn't expect and you're like, oh, okay, please don't do that again. And they're like, well, I didn't realize that was an expectation. And that can be a challenging conversation. I think that there's been maybe just a handful of things where I'm like, oh, I didn't think I had to explicitly say this, but do you mind, doing this going forward? And I think just a really frank conversation. And I think understanding that, as with hopefully everybody that we work with and interact with in our jobs, especially residents, they're just here trying to do a good job. They're just here trying to impress you, and they're trying to take a good care of patients. And in my mind, we're on the same team. It's us together working toward that goal. And I think if you set it up as a common objective in that way, then any sort of feedback is not objectionable whatsoever, because it's not me versus them. It's us versus, whatever the problem is. And I think one thing that's helpful is meeting them sort of on an emotional standpoint and making them feel kind of heard and validated, et cetera. An example would be if they go home early and not tell you, for instance. I don't really have this problem usually, but hypothetically, you could say, okay, was there something you need to get home to? Was there, were you up late last night? What is it? Try to find actually, out of genuine curiosity, was there a reason? And connect with them a little bit behind what that reason might be. And then you can just say oh, I totally get it. Your dog was sick or whatever. Just, I would appreciate if you let me know next time. And that, I think, solves pretty much all the problems that I've had so far, at least. And then it just becomes on the document for next time I send it out. It's great.
With pinecone after it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Part of the challenge is not just working with your peers and your co-residents, but also kind of managing up and advocating for your residents, for yourself, interfacing with the faculty. Any advice from that standpoint and how you approach that aspect of your leadership?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think a lot of chief residents struggle with this maybe more than some of the other aspects of it. I think it comes a little naturally to me. Part of it is I've built a pretty good rapport with our attendings over the last few years, I think. And so they all kind of trust me and know that I have good intentions. I think part of it is, I think if they see that you're working hard and giving your all to the patients, that they give you a lot of grace and a lot of understanding, and they are willing to listen to you when you come up to them with an issue or something that, as your role of chief resident, needs to change, etc. And I think doing it in a confrontational way is not the correct way of going about it, but a collaborative way. Actually, much the same as what we were talking about with just how to kind of address problems with residents. I think similarly with managing up, setting it up very intentionally and carefully as the two of you together against whatever the problem is, rather than the two of you opposed, just kind of erases all opportunities for defensiveness, all opportunities of conflict, and is really just a problem-solving team effort to actually address whatever needs to be done. And as long as you're there, putting in the work, working hard, showing your dedication, I don't think there's anything that can be said negatively against that. And I don't see why we can't work together to solve things. I haven't had issues yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned a couple of things that are important, because as we're talking about leadership, there's ways that you're developing and cultivating your leadership from early on, right? You don't have to wait until you're going into your chief year to think about it. And one thing you mentioned, which is important, is, establishing your reputation early, right? And that's something that, that's your hard work, that's your everyday showing up, being honest, admitting mistakes, being trustworthy. Because then once you're in that leadership role and you're managing up with faculty, they know that they can trust you and rely on you. And that's something that's put in just by day after day, being a good resident, showing up and doing your job. And I think the other thing that I've noticed you do well, Max, when managing up is you're very open to feedback and constructive criticism. So if somebody comes to you and is upset about something that happened, your response is not to be put off by that. You dive into it. You say, oh, thank you so much for bringing that up. What could I have done differently to manage the situation better? Or do you have any advice for how I could navigate that? Because I noticed that I was struggling and I clearly didn't do a very good job of it. What would you tell me to do the next time? And so one thing I think that as you're managing up, you're always going to make mistakes, or your team's going to make mistakes. You're going to be dealing with things that go wrong. Rather than shying away from those, to actually just dive in and show that you want to improve and you want to address them, that makes any leader, faculty, people above you really know that they can trust you. You do that really well. I don't know, Gina, if you see that in your trainees too, that engenders trust.
Definitely. I think, as you're describing, approaching feedback from a standpoint of curiosity and, wanting to know more is definitely conducive to kind of having that relationship. And I think everything that you're saying about building a culture around, within your team is so important, and something we think of on the programmatic level too, is where you outline those expectations, but you don't hold people accountable to things that you're not doing yourself. And so you set up this kind of culture where everybody is kind of working for each other as a team, and really for you as the leader, because their performance reflects on you, and they respect you and admire you and kind of want to show it in their own work. And that's very difficult to make that, to kind of set that culture and that tone, but you do it by leading by example, which is what you're describing.
I think that one thing that I've tried to do consistently is exactly that. I think, a boss leads from the front and a leader leads from behind is kind of how I think about it. And truly, if I'm holding people to expectations that I'm not meeting for myself, then those words are going to ring hollow and they're not going to have any respect for them, I think. And I'm completely dedicated to showing my team that I'm there with them, doing the work with them. And any expectation I have is because it's an expectation of us and not of them. And myself isn't included in that. Dr. Carroll here at UCSF always says that he knows somebody's ready to lead when they start thinking in terms of we instead of me. And I love that. He told me that like a few years ago, and it stuck with me. I think it's really great. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, I think, when I think about my residency, actually, Dr. Carroll comes to mind for me too. I remember the first time I ever took call with him, I was terrified to like have him as my faculty on call. And, it was like an early Saturday morning, and I saw that I had an email from him, and he had gone, back and forth with a patient who had reached out to him directly about some, symptoms of a urinary tract infection. And he forwarded me this email that was like, over the last 2 hours, he had gone back and forth with this patient around UTI symptoms and figured out where he was going to drop off a culture and figured out what pharmacy we needed to send antibiotics to. And it was only then that he contacted me and said, oh, hey, I have this patient. I think he has a UTI. Can you put in the orders, for a culture and an antibiotic? And I thought, wow, like here's somebody who's the chair of the department at the time, who absolutely could have delegated this task to me to call the patient and, find out what was going on and where to send the antibiotics and everything. But, he did it. Like he, once you're in the position of leading by example and showing that there is no work that's beneath you, there is no task or no job that you wouldn't do yourself that you're asking other people, then yeah, other people are going to be willing to do it because they know that you would do it for them. And I think similarly as a leader, especially managing the kind of people above you, managing faculty, when your juniors know that you're going to, sometimes take the knocks for them, that, you may hear the negative feedback and deal with it so that they don't have to. That's also something that makes them like, want to be a part of that team.
That's advice that you gave me, Dr. Hampson, before I started. And that's something else that I think has really, really resonated with me. I think that when they see that you're making them look good, then they want to make you look good. And they do that by doing a good job and working hard. And I think that is like the ultimate motivation because you're there kind of returning the favor.
Yeah, but it works both ways. I could think of situations where a junior resident has made a mistake and it's kind of come to light, and ultimately the chief resident will kind of take ownership for it in many situations and say this happened because I maybe didn't deliver the message clearly, or this was some, really, or just describe it in very neutral terms. And I think that that's important because it's not about blame, but it's also about your role as the leader, that you are ultimately responsible for the actions of the team and communicating what the plan is. And then on the reverse side, your juniors will never forget. I'll never forget when one of my chief residents did that for me when I was a junior. You're vulnerable. And that earned my loyalty for that person for the rest of residency because I knew that I could trust this person. And I never wanted that to reflect poorly on him ever again. So little actions like that are things that your juniors will never forget.
I'm going to ask a little bit of a different question around leadership since we've been talking about managing up. How do you take advantage of the people above you to help develop you as a leader or give you opportunities for leadership? Because there's likely a lot of people who have, faculty or mentors that have the potential to kind of put them into leadership positions. So how do you navigate like asking for that or getting them to think of you for those opportunities?
Yeah, I think part of it is what we've discussed already, which is putting yourself into those opportunities as much as possible helps bring you to the forefront when other opportunities like that arise. But one thing that I've learned over the last few years is that being a mentee is actually quite an active, busy role. It's not passive whatsoever. And your mentors are busy. They don't necessarily have time to be thinking about you all of the time. And if you're really lucky and have a really great mentor who is thinking about you, is passing opportunities along to you without you doing anything, then that's very fortunate of you. But I think most of the time you need to advocate for yourself quite a bit and let them know frequently, like, hey, like this is what I'm interested in. This is, if something like this comes along, or you hear about anything, please let me know. And I've done that, quite a bit in our program, I think. Dr. Breyer, who's now our chair, has been a great mentor of mine since I was even a sub-I here. And I've communicated with him frequently about my aspirations to hold leadership and develop as a leader. And he is fully on that mission with me. And he has passed a lot of things along to me along the way that have turned out to be really good opportunities. So I think it is like that, like active mentee role that is super critical, and just reaching out and letting them know, because they want to help you, and they really do. And sometimes they may not exactly know how. So you can take that burden off of them and just explicitly say, like, this is how you can help me. And I know that you want to, and this is an opportunity for you to do so. And good mentors will jump all over that. And I think people that are above you in this field have tons of things that they can connect you with. They have those connections, they have that foresight and that insight. And it is, I think there's abundance of it if you just ask for it.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody wants to help everyone else, but, it's not always top of mind. But for trainees, I think, who see opportunities for scholarships, for a travel award, for a leadership position that they need to apply for, these are great ways to ask your mentors to help you. And, saying, hey, this needs an application and a letter from you, can I help you? Would you be willing to write a letter? Can I help you write a letter on my behalf so that, I can apply to this? I think everybody's happy to help. You're right, they don't necessarily know how, or it's not top of mind and on their the ever-growing to-do list. But if you reach out with those opportunities, then of course people want to see their own trainees and mentees succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's part of the challenge is, knowing what to ask for sometimes, but you have the example of your other residents, or even as you get further along in your training, you're aware of other opportunities. These are, specific things you can ask about. I think the error would be to wait and think the opportunities are going to come to you without asking, and that somehow just by continuing to do what you're doing and working hard that they'll come. And sometimes that does work out, but many times you have to be very proactive about what you need and want, and ask explicitly to people. Even if you don't have something granular, just tell them, I'm looking for a job, or I'm thinking of this. What is your opinion? These are things that need to really have dedicated conversations.
Well, and not just ask, but ask again or apply again. A lot of these leadership roles, you may apply multiple times before you get them. And just because you don't get it the first time does not mean that you shouldn't continue to go for it, or you're not a good fit for it, or there's not some other great opportunity for you. And I think, one of the lessons is not just looking for those, but not getting discouraged if it doesn't happen right away. And there's plenty of examples that I have of, leadership positions that I've gained only after multiple tries and failures, and getting feedback and redirecting and figuring out how to do it again. And that, Gina's shaking her head. I know she does too.
Totally. That's such good advice. I hope everyone appreciates what good advice that is. Because at least for me early on, the tendency was to take it personally. I'm not qualified. There's no chance. But actually, sometimes that's just part of the process. Your first application is that they regard that as you're interested, and you just keep knocking at the door until sometimes the door will open. But don't take it personally, and just keep trying for sure.
I applied for a leadership position a few years ago, and I didn't get it. And they reached out to me afterwards, and they said, oh, we, just wanted to let you know, we loved your application. We get so many applications for these leadership positions that there's no way we're giving it to somebody who applies on the first time. So hope you keep applying. And that's great. That's explicit information that you just need to keep trying, because it's not that you don't deserve it. It's just that there's a lot of people who are deserving of and want leadership opportunities, and your time will come.
That's great. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think I've learned a lot chatting with you, Max, and always learn from talking with Lindsay. And I think that this is the perfect way to kick off our series on trainees, looking, for more great conversations to come, where we delve into these topics that are so important for residents and even early career faculty.
Yeah, I agree. And, we're excited. We have a few ideas and guests that we're getting lined up. But I would also say, if people have ideas for topics that they want to focus on that are particularly focused around even students or, trainees or early career faculty, definitely reach out to me or Gina. And, we're really excited about putting this series together and making it so that it's actually useful and interesting to people. So we welcome any thoughts or ideas. And Max, thanks so much for a fantastic conversation. You set such a good example in how to think about leadership intentionally. And I think that's something that's actually, it takes a lot of effort. And you helped me realize just how much effort goes into it. And I think that's hopefully useful for people to realize that, you know, it's not just that this comes naturally. It's okay that it takes some work and that you don't always get it right. You might have to, you know, change things along the way. But I think because in medicine we're put into these leadership roles often de facto, it is important to think about how we do it intentionally so that we set ourselves up as good leaders and then cultivate the people behind us to be the same. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been really fortunate to have some fantastic mentors along this journey, and you're one of the best. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend.
If you have any questions or comments, DM us at _BackTable on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter.
BackTable is hosted by Aditya Bagrodia
And Jose Silva.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.